Today we have Amanda Tainter, who is our instructional designer, and Julie Kehoe, who is, you also have, well, Amanda's our instructional designer, and you do other work too? No, okay.
The outcomes coordinator.
I'm a
Outcomes
math instructor.
coordinator. And
Yeah.
Julie, you are also doing some instructional designer work too, right?
Yes,
But
I'm
you're
I'm
also,
Amanda's assistant.
and you
So yeah, I
are,
do instructional design work, but I'm also a math instructor at Reedley
yeah.
College.
Yeah, so today they're going to talk about alternative grading practices, and I've been done some of this work. It can be very exciting and interesting. So I will hand it over to you two. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for giving us the opportunity. This is one of the first passion projects that Julie and I really embarked on together, and we've loved it. There's definitely ups and downs and difficulties, and we're happy to share those as we go along, since we've been doing this for quite a few years now. Please ask questions as we go. This is definitely meant to be an interactive process, especially if you disagree. We love to have those yeah, but conversation, because I think it really helps us to figure out why, or not us to figure out why, but talk through those things that, yeah, you're right, that's hard, and that part didn't work out well, and here's how we found around it. We definitely don't want to always present the shiny side of things, and be really realistic and say, yeah, this is ideally what it should be, but here is what we found realistically we needed to do in our class to make this work well for our discipline, our course, our community, whatever it might be. Let's see. Now there we go.
There we go.
So go ahead and share in the chat why you're here today and what you feel your current challenges are with grading. If you find it effective, if you're just here to be a looky-loo, or if you're sitting there going, you know what, this doesn't work. I'm sick of grading. I hate grading. At the end, I don't know if my students learned. Share some of that. You can either, unmute or chat, put in the chat. And we'll just give you a second to think about that. You don't have to share in the chat, but I do want to give you just a minute to think about your grading, especially at this time in the semester where it's really in the dredges of it. How's it working for you?
And you might be rethinking of how you want to change things for next semester. So hopefully we'll get some ideas today from us. Okay. Oh, yeah. So the arbitrary part, Sally, that was a big thing for me. I felt like I had a lot of arbitrary things going on in my classes. So this definitely helped me to feel more intentional. And it made it feel like the decisions and the way I was grading and assessing my students was much more, because of the constraints of, the course and things like that, rather than just, well, I said it was due on this day, so that's when it needs to be done.
We'll talk about that. So here are some of the original issues that Julie and I had, and what brought us to really wanting to change things. And we'll talk about the book towards the end that a lot of these concepts came from, and we've definitely adapted and modified those concepts from the book, but it was a fantastic way to start to get a lot of the research-based why. We don't have time in the context of this presentation to present all the research, but there is a lot of research saying, okay, this is a good, there's reasons why we chose to do this. It wasn't just, hey, let's throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. This was an intentional choice for sure.
Yeah.
Julie, you know me, just chime in.
I found like one of my most biggest pet peeves is I'd find at the end of the semester, students would be like, well, how many points do I need to pass? And so the focus was really not on learning the content of the class, but just getting that grade, just about point earning. And a lot of students will get very good at playing the game of earning points. And it's really not about the content or learning or preparing for future courses, things like that. It also can be very discouraging. Students can often, with traditional grading, reach a point where, well, you've dug a hole that you're not going to be able to get out of. There's no way you can pass this class. And in the ways that I've been able to redesign my grading, that doesn't ever happen. As long as the student doesn't give up, and makes the most of, every opportunity in the class to learn and to demonstrate that learning, they can pass the class right up until the end of the semester.
Yeah, and students have a really big ability to do this in Canvas with that what if grading. They can do the manipulation of the math and say, yeah, I'm halfway point. I could get 100% on all of the other assignments and I'm still not going to pass, or I'm still just going to get a C. So what's the point of even trying now? And I know for me, if I know halfway that there's no way I'm going to be able to get an A in this class or a B in this class, tap out, I'm done. Why would I even try anymore? And so this changing the grading to the strategies that we're going to suggest eliminates that. And then the big thing for me was that I was always felt that the grades, did they really reflect the learning? I could say, could I say when I looked at an A student, oh yeah, you know all this content, or were you able to just manipulate the points well enough to pass the class? And that really bothered me, especially as when I became student learning coordinator and I'm starting to, preach the importance of learning and assessing learning and looking at my own class and going, am I sure they're learning, or did they just get enough points to pass? Am I positive that those two concepts align with one another?
Yeah, and
And
I had a lot of fluff in my grades that would allow students to boost their grade without actually having to learn anything. Like, I'll give you extra credit if you come to this event, and things like, that's not demonstrating learning. And so it's a way of, giving them fluff and helping them to up their grade in the class without actually learning the content that I'm expecting them to. So removing that fluff was very helpful.
yeah,
And also I became like, it just felt like I was their compliance officer who was just like, just making sure you're complying, and I'm teaching you time management skills and all these, I'm teaching you to live in the real world and things like that. And it just made it hard to be, to build a relationship with students that was built on like, no, I'm here to help you learn and be successful in this class, not make sure that you comply with all my rules. So.
yeah, think about how many email correspondence or how many less you would have if it wasn't focused on the rules, if it wasn't focused on late policies, if it wasn't focused on dispute of grades, if it wasn't asking about makeups, and we're going to go on to that later. If all of that correspondence rather could be on feedback, on learning, on supporting students, and we do only have a finite amount of time. And if it's focused on those rules and policies, that's what our correspondence is. What has to give is the relationship building correspondence.
So we were this all happened for us, I think both right around the same time, right around the pandemic. The pandemic hit, we're suddenly all working from home, and it's a completely different ballgame from what we're used to. And so this is when Amanda recommended I read this book, and I sat down, I'd read a chapter every morning before I started work. And it really just made me rethink the traditional grading system that I experienced as a student and that I was also, using in my own classes.
And it came down to this creed, and I should let Julie talk about this because she's the one that put the slide together, but I love saying it. So students who learn should pass. And it was just astounding how often that didn't happen. When you sit down and had a conversation with a student who didn't pass and going, oh my goodness, you know this stuff, you've learned this stuff, why didn't you pass? But it could have been this happened in their family, that everything was late, they weren't able to get everything in on time, they missed a test, whatever, but they knew the stuff. And how our class is structured, how we deliver our grades should simply boil down to this. If you learn the content, you should pass the class, right? Sorry, Julie, I stole your thunder.
It's hard to argue with, like, okay, this student learned, they should pass my class. I mean, maybe they're not going to get an A, but they should pass the class if they've demonstrated that they learned the material. And so this just kind of became like the guiding principle, or our guidepost for, reviewing every policy that we had in place. Is like, well, is this, preventing a student from passing or putting a barrier in front of that student if they learn the material, but still there's a barrier there because they have some policy that I have in place. So anything that was impacting their grade that was not about learning, something they've learned, is something that we had to rethink.
Yeah. So then moving forward, if that is our creed, if you learn, you should pass. What are the things that needed to be changed in order to do that? Accurate grades. The grades that students receive should reflect their learning and grow, not just, or not, did you submit all the assignments on time? Did you post to the discussion board? Our grades should reflect if they're learning.
And no
I was gonna
fluff.
let you go. Yeah, and no fluff. And we'll talk about what that fluff is, and you're gonna be surprised because I have to fight against the fluff all the time.
Yeah.
Because it does creep in, and our institutions are really bad about it because it's offer extra credit to go to this, offer extra credit to go to that. And we'll talk about extra credit in a second.
Yeah, we're just so used to using grades as the carrot to get students to do the things we want them to do. And that's not going to result in an accurate reflection in their grade of what they've actually learned in the class.
Yeah. And our policies should emphasize the natural consequences, not the arbitrary penalties for missing the deadlines for incomplete work. When I removed my late policy, it still is just absolutely stunning to students. But what do I care? I mean, really, when I sat down and thought about it, I'm not sitting there waiting for, oh, submission, great. Oh, submission, great. Oh, submission, great. So did it matter if they got it in at 5 o'clock on Wednesday night, if I was going to not do grading for a week later? Or maybe it is. Maybe you are an instructor that really likes as they come in to be able to grade it. Then does it really matter what day it comes in? If they're able to submit it, it was that date and that time was so arbitrary. Now, there are hard deadlines. We do have the end of the semester, and we can't have everything submitted on the last day of semester. Hours in the day are a finite resource. So that is not an arbitrary penalty. It's a natural consequence. If you submit it the last day of the semester, I simply do not have the hours to grade it before my grades are due. That's a natural consequence. And so changing those policies was one of the big guiding principles. And we'll talk a lot of these in detail. Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah. And clear communication is another big one. So we're big advocates of rubrics and feedback. And I know in the comments, a lot of you mentioned feedback. So we'll definitely talk about that. But yeah, being able to communicate these policies is important. And just communicating with your students and creating a feedback loop for learning is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And the last one was the opportunities for redemption. When you have the opportunity for students to continue learning after the initial assessment, then the learning never stops. Like if I give a test and, okay, well, that's your grade, we're moving on to the next unit. Maybe you needed to know that for the next unit, but you didn't learn it, and you're not going to bother because you're not going to be graded on it, or it's not going to help you in your grade in any way. So giving opportunities of redemption was also another really important pillar of our changes here.
And he in the book that really got us down the pathway, he uses the concept of sports and practice in the sports and the games, as it really was a way to solidify this concept in my head. If we say, oh, I'm going to go play baseball and I'm going to read some books and I'm going to walk out on the field and play the game, that's not how it works. You have to go to practice. And during that practice, you don't have all these fans watching you and fail. And it's going to depend if you do the $1 billion contract or whatever it is. You have a coach that's sitting there. And as you're going through doing all of these low stakes opportunities to practice, and yet we rarely do that with students. It's all or nothing. You better pass this test or you are unredeemable. I mean, you've got 4 big exams, and if you don't do well on that one exam, you're down to only possibly being able to get enough points to get a B. You don't do good on the next exam, you only can get the C. And those are high stakes, no opportunity to practice and to refine and to get better and to learn. If our goal is for students to learn, why wouldn't they be able to retake that test and show that they've learned? If you get a D on the first time you take the test, why don't you practice and take the test again and get an A? If we say we're all about students learning, why is that such a problem for so many of us?
So we've touched a lot on this, but our guiding principle and all these guiding principles kind of led us to rethink things like, as we've been alluding to, late penalties. So I no longer mark homework late. I don't take a penalty off of that because it's not reflective. If they learned it, but they just didn't learn it by a particular deadline, that shouldn't affect their grade if we're trying to make our grades accurate and reflective of what they actually learned. Go ahead.
And here's one of our lessons learned. And so it's really, I've enjoyed being able to progress in this presentation, because when we first started, it was, there's no late penalties, and we still stick to that. But for me, I do put a due date on it, and I tell my students, this is your pacing guide. Anything can be submitted late, because when I first started, I just had a due date on everything that was at the end of the semester. Well, that was disastrous, because I'm not scaffolding students to what would be an appropriate pacing guide to help you on these assignments. And so I think, very clearly to articulate every assignment can be submitted after this due date in Canvas. Hands down, I still get 2 or 3 students every single assignment. Something happened. Can I submit this late? Please don't penalize me. Nope. Remember our late policy. This is just a pacing guide. So those due dates are there to help students understand this is the pace that's probably going to be best for you to submit things by. But you can go back and submit things afterwards. These are just helpful guides to due dates. So I wouldn't advocate at this point in time to say, don't have any due dates, because you want to help students gain those time management skills. What are some of your learned lessons, Julie, on this part?
Definitely, there has to be consequences for falling too far behind. You want to give them, nudges in that direction of like, okay, and a lot of this comes back to that principle of clear communication. So maybe a consequence of late assignments isn't that your grade is going to go down in that assignment, but you are going to hear from me, or we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to come up with a plan for how you're going to get caught up. Things that will actually support their learning and help them get caught up versus just punishment for non-compliance, no matter the reason. And removing any barriers from that. I don't require students to ask for more time. It's readily available. They still have trouble, with realizing that, but yeah, that's what it comes down to. So I will have assignments that, this is the due date, but I'm going to give you additional time. And at some point this is going to expire because I need it turned in, but, and that will help give them that nudge. But there will be further opportunities to demonstrate your learning on this, even if you didn't get this first one. It's just fewer opportunities, perhaps. Making it finite option, or finite number of opportunities helps with that as well.
And for me in ECE, I didn't have homework. And so I was thinking through, or what does that look like? What is the equivalent in my courses? And this, as well as some other concepts, I realized I use discussion boards in my fully online courses as homework, because it's a way for them to flesh out these concepts, to have a dialogue, to think deeply about it. And I didn't want it worth points, nor did I want to read any more of the, I agree with you, that's a great point responses. They're just blah. But the students who really wanted and found it a worthwhile activity to engage in that back and forth, it had rich dialogue that I really loved reading. So I continued to offer discussion boards, but they were community building and skills practice. And so they're still in all of my courses, first of all, for ISI, so I need to have those, but it's not required. It's on there. There's a due date, but there's 0 points possible. And so students can do it or not do it, and replies are never required, but I still have about 50% of the students who every discussion board love engaging with their community and talking about it. And I tell them this is another way for you to perhaps demonstrate the skills, and we'll look at that in just a second. So if in one of the assessments I'm not able to see the skill demonstrated, I can go into the discussion board and say, dude, they've got it right here. They're talking about this skill. They understand it. They just didn't demonstrate it here. So it was just another way for them to be able to show me that skill, but it was in a no stakes way. So that was the aha moment I had a couple of years ago, because Julie would always talk about not the grading homework. I'm going, I don't really do that in ECE, but that was the application for me.
Yeah, and math homework is a big part of the class, and oftentimes a decent portion of a grade. But I mean, in math in particular, we want students to make mistakes, because that's when the learning happens. So we want them to feel free to make mistakes and learn from that. And when every single thing that they're given is part of their grade, suddenly mistakes aren't allowed anymore. And it becomes, too important to them to do well on those assignments. So I stopped grading homework completely. I still give them those homework assignments. I give them due dates for them so they can pace themselves. But if they aren't able to do every problem, or if they find that, watching a video or doing the problems in class or things like that are enough for them to learn, then maybe that homework is not necessary and it becomes just busy work that they're doing to earn a grade. So that becomes optional in the class instead, and they can, choose the way that they learn best for the particular class or subject.
All right, math lady, I'll let you take this one.
So another big issue that comes up with all this is how we're assessing and how we're grading. And the traditional 100-point scale is pretty problematic. For instance, how can I explain the difference between a 78 and a 79 on a test? It becomes arbitrary at that point. And we're playing around with numbers and, being nitpicky and ticking off for things. So it can be very difficult. It's also very skewed. If you look at the scale itself, it's very skewed towards failing. 70% of that scale is failing. And so it can be demotivating for students as well as just being skewed against them. So we don't use a 100-point rubric. We use something much more condensed where I can actually describe each level. For me, that's a 4-point rubric where I have 0 to 4. I can describe each one of those point values for a student for every skill that I'm going to assess. This is what a 4 looks like for this skill that I'm assessing. And this is what a 3 looks like. And you provide that to them, very clear communication again about what your expectations are. And it makes it much faster to grade. So I know someone mentioned in the chat earlier about speeding things up. If I'm not sitting there nitpicking on every little thing, on every little mistake they made, every negative that's missing, then it becomes much quicker to grade. And I really spend more time on providing feedback for improvement versus figuring out what that grade should be and making sure that I'm consistent across every single exam and every single question. So consistency becomes super easy when you have a rubric that is detailed out and describes that for you and for your students. Holds you accountable. So that makes the flexible deadline also much easier, because if I get students turning in different assignments at different times, I might be grading 3 different exams on the same day. But I have a rubric to guide me through it, so I can get through that grading very quickly and provide consistent grades and feedback to students. So this is a huge part. I am at the point now where I don't ever want to see an assignment given that doesn't have a clear rubric describing how the student's going to be evaluated on that assignment.
Yeah, and this was definitely the point of when I was reading the book. It was just this huge burden that was lifted off my shoulders, because it would be agony to sit there as I'm grading. I would love reading what my students wrote, but I would read it and then realize, oh my goodness, I've got to put a numerical value on this. Is this a 69? Is this a 70? Because that makes a difference. Now, a 70 and a 72 might not seem like that big a difference, but at the end of the semester, a consistent 2-point difference that could add up to them passing or not passing. And it just felt like this huge burden sitting there figuring out, what point do I give this? Okay, they missed a bunch of spelling, but their grammar was great. Okay, so does that mean that they get all 10 points, or do I give them 2 points? And that was just such a waste of time, but it felt like this is what you're supposed to do, right? Isn't this what being a teacher is all about? And so by reading the book and having this permission to go, no, it's not. This scale was just dreamt up by someone 150 years ago who, had a whole lot of issues. And there was a reason they did this, to suppress a whole subset of people groups. Oh, no, this is done for me. I'm good not using this ever again. So that's probably been the most advantageous thing. Well, they're all advantageous to embrace, but as far as freeing me up to make grading so much more enjoyable, it was abandoning this stupid scale that is so stupid.
So if we've convinced anybody, and really I would emphasize on this, is maybe you like some of what you're hearing, and maybe some of you're like, no, I don't see how this could work for me. The great thing about this is you don't have to go wholesale, make all these changes all at once, but you can start anywhere. You can start to introduce flexibility and start to, hit these pillars in your class by making small adjustments can be really impactful for your students. For me, I'm an all-in person. I read the book and I did all this at once, and it was scary. But I'm glad I did it that way. For me, that's what worked for me. But it doesn't have to work that way for everybody. So, I mean, we're still going to talk in more detail a little bit about some of this, but if you're thinking you wanted to start making changes like what we're talking about, this is kind of where we did it and where we recommend other people get started. And oh, this one's a little different.
I think we're talking about each one individually here. Okay. So the first thing that for me is a big deal was taking a look at my student learning outcomes. And we're all in the practice, most of us are in the practice of, okay, we need to assess our student learning outcomes, but they're so big. I don't know about yours, but every course, these student learning outcomes, I mean, they're meant to encompass an entire course. And so there was so many different little nuances in there that I felt I can't just have one project that assesses this SLO and just slap it on there. So I found it to be so helpful to take each student learning outcome and break it down into those skills that the students would need to demonstrate. And this is an earlier iteration. I meant to change this slide because I've since gotten so much better at delineating these. But I would sit and think, okay, so here is the outcome. What do I need to see a student do in order to show me they know this outcome? And so each SLO was usually broken up into 5 to 8 skills that I then could assess on each individual skill. And either an assignment could have 1, it could have 3, it could have 5, it could have 6 skills, depending on the depth of the assignment. But then I was able to clearly articulate to students, here is how many skills you're going to show me on this assignment. And then the point value also became something that was easier to articulate. So if I have an assignment and I'm assessing 6 skills, then that's, oh goodness, 6 times 3, whatever that is, 18. I'm not a math person. So then that's an 18-point assignment. And that would be a huge assignment. Most assignments were worth 3 points, which is one of the most difficult things for students to understand because I'm just assessing one skill. So they might think, oh, well, it's not a 100-point paper or whatever it is, so it's not that big of a deal. But when they see, no, you missed that assignment and now your score has gone down significantly, it's because there's less than 100 points in the entire class.
Yeah, and
Anything you
so
want to
this
add?
helps with accurate grades. It helps us, by breaking it down. This is basically principles of backwards design, right, Amanda? And
Yeah.
so I mean, we're basically re-examining our assignments, aligning them with the stated outcomes on the core for the class, and allows you to cut a lot of stuff. Like I found I was way over assessing my students. I would have a math test and like, oh, this is a cool problem. Let's stick that on there. And it was really like, I wasn't really being intentional about what I was assessing and whether I was making sure that they were actually learning the skills that I was intending to make sure they were learning without including extra stuff. So it can, I was able to cut my assignments down, which also helped with the grading because I was putting too much stuff on there. It was more than was necessary to assess my students. And maybe you'll find assignments that, oh, well, okay, this is a great assignment, but it's not really helping with any of the outcomes. So should I really be asking my students to do this, or should I really be part of their grade?
Yeah. And this is to me where some of that fluff that Julie was talking about, it needed to be removed because it was creating that white noise. And I had the same thing. It was some of the assignments that I loved. And I thought, these are fantastic assignments. Once I did this mapping, it was, yeah, they're great assignments because I love them, but they don't belong in this class. They're just creating detracting noise for them really mastering or becoming proficient in these skills that are part of my class. And so by removing that noise that wasn't part of it, then they could focus on these, and the success rates are much better because of that for me, because I'm able to focus on those skills.
And so here's an example of one of my 4-point rubrics. This is for a Calculus 2 course. And so it looks at each level that they could get for this particular skill and gives a really clear explanation of what I'm looking for. Particularly for math, a question I would often get is, what does showing your work look like? And well, now I can refer them to this rubric where I'm describing what a 4 looks like, what I'm looking for when I say show your work on this problem. These are the things I'm looking for. So it's very transparent. Students can even evaluate their own work while they study. And, you know, when they turn in that actual assessment that, okay, am I actually doing this? So I even have a video I provide to my students that tells them how to use a rubric, because not every student will know intuitively or have ever seen a rubric. And so I tell them, well, just focus on the top score. That's what you want, right? And that's where everything is that I'm looking for. The other ones are going to help me with grading if you don't hit this mark, but this will tell you exactly what I'm looking for. And so it's not like playing a guessing game with each one of your teachers about what they're expecting. And this, to me, is why I find it so important that when we're giving assignments to students that we're explaining what our expectations are, because they might be different from a previous instructor that they had in that subject. And so it's not like a guessing game or a moving target that they're trying to chase.
Yeah, and I was anti-rubric for a long time. I hated how restrictive it was. I felt like I just want to be able to free flow and give my feedback to students. And between having so many great conversations with Julie and reading the book about this is why there's such great value to students in having these rubrics, I became a wholehearted convert. And I do see it has made my teaching so much better. And I still write all sorts of comments, so it's not eliminating that, but it takes that subjectivity out of it. And I can clearly look at the rubric. And it also allows me for my discipline to embrace a lot more UDL, universal design for learning approaches in my teaching, because it doesn't matter the modality or the format a student was to submit the assignment in. If the rubric is talking about these skills, how they choose to submit the assignment doesn't matter, as long as I can see those skills in there. And so that became a much easier way to make that transition of, shoot, if you want to turn in a PowerPoint presentation, a video, a voice recording, a flyer, whatever it is you want to do, as long as I can see these skills in there that are in the rubric, that is absolutely okay. But I did need to create clear rubrics. One of the ways that I've found AI to be incredibly helpful is still refining my rubrics. Julie is the queen of rubrics. Like, hers is amazing. This is still a skill that I'm developing. And AI really has helped me in the last year to make my rubrics so much more clear to students. And so I can easily take a assignment, plug it in to AI and say, can you help me create a rubric? And I tell it, these are the 4 criteria, 4, not columns, but blah, areas that I want in the rubric. Can you break it down to that? And I've had to do definitely some reading and modifications, but for the most part, the rubrics are very clear for students. And I also tell AI, these are the skills that I'm assessing with this assignment. And so that's been a very helpful tool for me to improve the rubrics that I'm offering to my students. And I also, the last thing I want to add on this is you've heard me say it's groups of 3, because for me, I've told students, you should be at a 3. That's where you are. That's where I expect you to be. If you could come in here and teach this skill, and there is some times where they can, it's again, ECE. So there's some people that have been in the field for years and years. I said, I'll give you a 4 if you're demonstrating to me that you could teach this skill. You don't, this is blown away, but I have very few 4s. And it does act as extra credit or above because the assignment is worth in groups of 3, but it makes it very clear to them that I don't expect you to exceed this skill. I want you to be proficient at this skill. That's where you should be for this course, for this assessment.
So if you're wondering, well, how does this fit into a new grading scale? So this is the grading scale now when you're using a smaller rubric, like a 4-point rubric, versus the 100% scale. Now, Canvas is going to convert everything to a 100% scale, no matter what. But you can create your own grading scheme in there to reflect this. And so what I do is just like, here is the list of skills I'm going to assess you at. They're all worth 4 points, and this is the average score overall, but I'm just going to take a straight average, no weighting, which makes it very transparent and easy for students to understand how their grade is calculated. And this is the breakdown. Actually, those breakdowns are off. What's going on there? I think when this got transferred to this presentation, it's messed up.
Oh, sad
So it should just
story.
be the A to F. So if you average 3.5 to 4 on all the skills in the class by the end, then that's an A. And then it goes down by 0.75 for each level below that. And I mean, for me, really, you might look at that and say, well, okay, a 2 out of 4 is passing in this class. Well, yes, but that's because I give a 2 if I feel that you understand the concept, but you still need to work on some things. That's still passing. There's some mistakes in there that would need some fixing, but it's still a passing grade. So yeah, that's the correct one.
Sorry,
Get
Julie.
translated over. Quite right. From our old presentation.
Fail for double checking AI.
So that's one way to do it, but I mean, there's lots of different ways that you could do this. Maybe there's some skills that are just deal breakers. Probably the biggest challenge with this is just getting Canvas to do what you want if you're using the Canvas gradebook. But there's a lot of different ways that you can make this work. Like maybe you have to get at least the score on these 5 to get an A, and these others that are maybe less critical, you just need to get this particular score. So you can get very creative. And not just hold yourself to, I have to do like a weighted average or an average on a 100% scale to determine a grade in the class.
And I've found using those custom grading scales in Canvas to be super helpful because you can also have it display the letter grade. And so as students are making the transition and understanding this is a new way to do it, they can see, maybe you do have a 67%. That's still a B in how this is grading. Otherwise, it can be very unnerving for them. So I've found it to be really helpful to point them to that. I also use a learning mastery gradebook in Canvas. The issue with Canvas is that you have to have both. So while I continue to tell them, hey, look at where you are on each skill, they continue to default to the gradebook. So I like to use both just to be able to show them here, this is how this aligns, but they will always use the traditional gradebook.
Okay, I think we can go back to the other one if you wanted to.
That's fine. Now we're here.
Okay. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so I guess this is the last one then. Okay, so the last thing is talking about that feedback that I know some of you mentioned in the chat. Sorry. And so we either doing retakes or resubmissions, whatever makes sense for the assignment or the subject matter. It helps us to create a feedback loop with our students where they submit something and you give them feedback and then they continue to improve. For me, this looks like a retake. So I will give students an exam on a unit and they turn in their work. I give them a bunch of feedback and a grade, and then they have the opportunity to take a new version of the test. And then they just focus on the ones they want to improve on, and they can take that feedback, they can practice some more, they can go get tutoring, and then do that retake. It's a new problem on the same subject and see if they've improved. And so the learning never stops with that, and particularly if that is, look at the math, concepts build on each other. So I want to make sure they've learned that before they're moving on to the next thing. And this is a way of doing that and also rewarding them for that learning rather than punishing them for not learning it the first time on the timeline that I provided.
Yep. And mine is very similar. Of course, it's not math tests, but when they submit whatever the assessment is, I have attached those specific skills. And so if they get a 2 or a 1, on whatever skills it is, make sure and leaving robust feedback of what is missing from the assignment that they submitted and encourage them, hey, resubmit this. If you haven't gotten proficiency in these skills, resubmit every assignment. And it's up to them if they do or they don't, but for the majority of students, they'll choose to resubmit because usually it's just little things that are missing for me to see skill proficiency. And that's the other big part of making this transition is having that verbiage prevalent throughout the course so that they can really understand, here is what I'm doing it and why am I doing it. So I need you, you haven't gotten full points on this. You haven't developed skill proficiency. In order to develop skill proficiency, I need to see these things, and then you can resubmit and I can reevaluate.
Okay, I think we've thrown a lot at you to think about. But I think we'd love at this point to hear questions, concerns you have about all this.
Thoughts? Yes, but. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Okay, so I love a lot of this, and I'm kind of been trying to move towards this type of like grading scheme. One difficulty I found with the retakes and the resubmissions is I have that policy where students can resubmit work right after they read through. But one issue I found is if I don't build in points for actually using my feedback, sometimes students will completely scrap everything. And so then it kind of nulls my feedback and that time, right? And they'll just turn in something else that just still doesn't follow the format or the have the skills I'm kind of looking for. So that's one of my concerns. I haven't really thought about like how I can build that into it where they actually do take my feedback on something I've been, like working with them on instead of just like kind of taking an approach of just throwing whatever at the assignment and hoping something sticks. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what
Yeah.
subject you're teaching, but it sounds like maybe this is where the instructions can come in. It's like, if you don't want them to scrap it and start over, then that's a requirement of the resubmission. There's no problem putting guidelines and rules within that so that you're getting at what you're looking for there. So if you truly want them to use your feedback, then maybe that's part of the assignment, is to demonstrate how that feedback was used. Or even like I know a common thing, like I've been tutoring my nephew in math, and his teacher has them do test corrections, but they have to explain what they did wrong to show improvement. So, I mean, you can add layers to that retake that kind of gets at those things that you're trying to get the students to demonstrate and to use the feedback that that you're providing them.
And Julie, you went through this a little bit when you had students that would just retake the math test. So what did you do? Because I can't remember now. You made some changes to stop that, because it sounds like very similar to what Alyssa's going through is, okay, I'm going to just try it again and try it again and try it again and try it again.
Yeah, I use the mastery pathways to prevent students, because you will get students that will they'll take the exam and then they'll go and take the retake before you even can grade the first version. And so I've prevented most of that with the mastery pathways, where they can't get to the retake until I have actually given them a grade and feedback on their assignment. But really the big thing, I think, is introducing scarcity. You don't want unlimited retakes, because that, first of all, would just be too much for the instructor. And so creating some limitations there will also make it so that they got to make each attempt count. They don't want to burn through their attempts and waste it without actually using that feedback. That feedback should be the key to their success in the retake. Is I'm telling you what you've done wrong and how you can improve, and that is going to get you to that higher grade that they are so motivated by on the retake. So yeah, I give my students 3 chances at each skill, and no more. So there's the initial attempt, there's a retake, and then the final exam I use as a final retake for the entire semester. So if a student still isn't quite where they want to be after they've done the first 2 attempts on something, they get that 3rd opportunity to show me they've learned it. But that scarcity of retakes or resubmissions does kind of help for them to take it a little more seriously each attempt.
Yeah, one strategy I've also found to be helpful is, in my feedback, being very specific when I say resubmit demonstrating proficiency in this missed skill, and I can reassess. I'll still get the same thing where they're totally redoing the assignment. I'm like, no, you don't need to redo it. But also then put in the comments, like, if there's something specific missing, okay, I'm missing this. If put it in the comments to show me that you understand this concept, whatever it might be. And that to me is quicker for grading, but also it hones them in. So it's one of those trial and errors, but we're not going to lie to you and say it's still not going to happen, because it is. And ultimately it comes down to you're going to run out of time. And so that scarcity, you can resubmit twice after you read my feedback saying you can't resubmit until you go back and, whatever it might be, review this options, and it's not points, but complete this, and then you can come back. And ultimately it's up to them. It's up to the students to decide if they want to learn the content, take your feedback or not, just like it's up to us if we choose to take feedback, in our profession.
Yeah, really a lot of what we're talking about is putting the control in the students' hands. They're in control of managing their time to ensure they get assignments done so that they complete the class. They're in control of using your feedback. And so it can be a really freeing thing. It's a lot of responsibility for students, and some students will struggle with this. But I think, to me, this is true time management, is holding yourself to a deadline rather than being held to someone else's deadline, and being able to manage your life and your time and making sure you get it done, even though someone isn't going to punish you if you don't get it done by that day. So that's a big part of it for me. David had a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I don't know if you saw the chat. So
yeah. So David had a question about how you motivate students to do retakes. Not all my students utilize it. A big part of this I have found is students, they're not used to having these kind of opportunities. Like, I was talking about finals week with my students last week, and one of my students looked at me and said, "I'm not used to my instructors being this nice to me." So, I mean, it is you really build a relationship with your students when you can sit there and explain to them that I care about your learning. I don't care about point earning. I don't care about meeting a deadline that I gave you. I care that you learn the material and you're successful. And so normalizing things like retakes, and you don't have to have it perfect the first time. This is a learning process, and so learning and getting feedback and then trying again, this is the learning process. But a lot of students feel like it's a bad thing to have to do a retake, or there's just a lot going on in their heads, I think, that will prevent them from asking for help and from utilizing retakes. So wherever you can normalize it, I will post, I will remind them, like, okay, if you haven't taken the first exam yet, even though it's past due, you can still do that. Or if you didn't do as well you wanted, remember to do the retake. I mean, just really encouraging them, or even saying things like, it's really great seeing all the people that are doing retakes, even if it's not true. If they believe that everyone else is doing it, then maybe it's not such a terrible thing that they need a retake, and that might encourage them a little bit more if it's just a normal part of the process, rather than like, oh, I needed extra help because I'm not as good as the other students, is kind of the kind of things they will tell themselves.
Yeah, and that was going to be my suggestion as well, is even if it's a little white lie or stretching the truth, putting up announcement is, I appreciate how many of you taken the time to resubmit so that you can, for me, demonstrate that skill proficiency. It's great to see you guys all reading my feedback and resubmitting that assignment, and then again, it normalizes it. Oh, I'm not the only one that didn't do that as well, so I should resubmit it. That's right. Not everybody will take that up, but it's a strategy.
Any other questions?
My only issue, and I go back and forth, and I went back to just more traditional grading this semester. I got a grading contract that I really love that uses some of this in it. But even in my face-to-face, and now I'm online, my students, like, even though I would show it to them and try and get them to track everything, they just didn't really connect to it. And I don't know how to solve that with Canvas. Like, I wish there was even some other thing that I could bring them to. Because the grading contract was, if they do a certain percentage of homework, which I did complete, non-complete, and then they had to get so many passing on essays, and they can even get a C by not writing one of the essays, but still, if they showed proficiency on those other essays. But I just don't know how to do that with the Canvas. So I just got so frustrated after last semester that I stepped back.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why contract grading is one of the things I'll recommend at the bottom of the traditional grading, just because it adds to the cognitive load, not just for students, but for you as well. Like for me, it was just an additional piece of, okay, now, yeah, it is tracking. It's where am I in here, where am I on there. Canvas has the Learning Mastery Gradebook, which makes it a little bit easier to integrate a skills-based kind of approach. But no, it Canvas innately does not have anything that makes it easy to do those types of, you can do groupings and set up groups and assignments, but all of that is hacking Canvas and adds another layer of complexity that students will have to understand. Same thing why the complete ungrading I'm not a big fan of, because it's also add to the cognitive load of students where they're having to self-reflect and all of that. Anytime you're going to approach grading differently, I'm a fan of. But to me, the bottom of the barrel, when we're looking at if you were to take the first steps on this and make it easy to use in Canvas, remove late policy penalties and remove extra credit. Like those are the two things, and allow retakes. Like those are three things that I would say Canvas makes it easy to do. And it doesn't add any cognitive load. But no, the answer to your question is no. It just,
Well,
tracking, whether embedding a Google Doc or something like that would be the best way.
Well, I liked it though, because with English, I feel like when I'm breaking it down into just skills, like, okay, so they got the thesis on this paper and they show proficiency, but not on this paper, which then changes the whole paper. Like that's one reason why I liked the grading contract, because I was still doing skills based in that it was like pass, no pass, or whatever. But I felt like it worked better for English than when I was doing it the other way. And um, so so here's me arguing with you, Amanda. No, but I did feel like it did better, and I felt like when I could convey it to students, like, look, you have this passing here, but you didn't do this, but you can still pass the class. It just felt better. So I need to figure out a way to do this in Canvas. And the problem with the mastery is, like, again, like writing a research paper is different than writing a paper about a book in some ways. I mean, there's similarities, but there are some differences. So I just don't know how to deal with all of that.
Yeah, I can definitely see a need in different disciplines for different ways of doing this. At the bare minimum, I wouldn't call it a contract with students.
Yeah.
Just because it has, too much of a formal. I mean, to me, I try and portray myself with my students as more like their coach, than their instructor, or so anything that makes it more transactional like that language is something I would just be a little hesitant to use with students. But I think different disciplines, I think they need to make different, like, this is what was great. Like, one thing I would say is get a grading buddy if you're going to start doing this. Someone you can bounce ideas off with. Amanda and I have done a lot of that, and being from different disciplines really helped us get different perspectives on the choices we were making. And I'm constantly, like, even before this meeting, I was bouncing ideas off of her, tweaks that I want to make that will maybe make it easier for my students to motivate my students to get assignments done in a timely manner and things like that. So definitely having people to, like, talk through these things with, and what works and what's needed. Sometimes it's great to have people to bounce it off of, and people from different disciplines.
Yeah, and I think if you just take that contract word out, Lori, I'm 100% supportive of that. I think I just hate the word contract.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. Like the language, and maybe there's another way to approach it, of showing them. I don't know what. I have to think about that. But I feel like I totally backslid. And I have, like, Carrie and I worked on this, like, we talked about it a lot. And some of this was working, some of this wasn't, but Canvas is the huge issue with some of it for us, because we're disciplined and because of what we need students to do.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that. It is, you're really trying to hack it to make it a useful tool and not add another technology. So yeah, I absolutely acknowledge that. And I like that anytime an instructor is trying to do something different than the traditional grading is going to be is going to be great, and hopefully encouraging and inspiring other instructors to be okay with that. And that's the biggest thing is the more we can enter in the dialogue and give permission for instructors to blow it up and say, hey, you don't have to do what's been done for 100 years. You know, it's just, this is your class. As long as you're being ethical in what you're doing, think about what's going to work best for it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Let me put Julie and I's email real quick. Oops, in the
Can you
chat?
also give the name of the book that you
Yeah.
are
Oh.
referring to again?
Sorry, it's Grading for Equity. I'm writing in the chat by Joe Feldman.
I have a
book.
little survey too that I had up here and I lost. Oh, here it is. So if I wouldn't mind, it's a 3-question, quick little survey just to help me find more ideas for professional development. And this could be from Reedley faculty, Madera faculty, Fresno City faculty. I don't care, because you all have great ideas, and I am sharing all of our professional development throughout the district. So if you take a second to fill that out, that'd be awesome. If you've already filled that out, then you can fill it out again, or don't worry about it.
And the
Anyway,
one thing that Julie and I would add about the book is you have to get to the end. Like, you're going to go through a couple of the chapters and go, what is he talking about? This is crazy talk. It really takes the culmination of all the ideas in it before it comes together and you sit back and go, oh, okay. I see how this could work. But that's probably the biggest disclaimer I always give, because if you just start with chapter 1 and read a couple of chapters, it's not going to be enough of a convincing argument. Each chapter has great content and is convincing in its own right, but he brings it together holistically at the end, so you can see, all right, I see why this is important to embrace. So so again, I always do that disclaimer, because when I'm recommending it, I think if people just get through chapter 1, this is crazy talk.
Oh, I argued with him all through the whole book, trying to hold on to all of the grading policies that I held dear. So yeah, if we haven't convinced you today, then maybe reading a little more in depth into each one of these concepts that we talked about, it might get you there, or even just get you rethinking. I think anytime you're rethinking your policies and trying to make your grades more accurate and reflective of learning is a positive for students.
well, thank you so much. That's the end of our workshop, but I appreciate you all being here. And I will just reiterate that Julie and Amanda are very helpful with this and are very happy to answer questions. I've had lots of conversations with them and am always talking to them about stuff like this. So have a great day, and don't forget about our other workshops that we have. I think Susie has sent out a list, and I know Julianne Mosier from the district sent out a list yesterday, so you can maybe go back and find that in your emails. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.